A pack of wolves surrounds a crying boy on the road, and what happens next is shocking. Night was falling over the desolate fields when a car pulled up to the side of a deserted road. The doors creaked open, and a couple stepped out, dragging a small boy with them. Fear and confusion filled little Emilio's wide eyes as his parents left him on the dusty ground. "I'm sorry, son," his mother whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We have no choice." Before Emilio could comprehend what was happening, his parents climbed back into the car. The engine roared to life, and they sped away, leaving a trail of dust and a terrified child in their wake. The sound of the car faded into the night, leaving only the echoing silence and Emilio's broken sobs. At just 6 years old, Emilio sat motionless, his torn clothes fluttering in the cool breeze. His small hands clung desperately to a worn teddy bear, the only piece of home he had left. Tears streaked his dirty cheeks as he cried out into the night. "Mom! Dad! Don't leave me here!" But his pleas vanished into the vast emptiness of the field. Emilio stumbled forward a few steps, unsure of where to go. Darkness closed in around him, and the unfamiliar nocturnal sounds of the countryside magnified his fear. The chill of the night seeped into his small frame, and he curled up beside a rock, clutching his teddy bear tightly as if it were his lifeline. His tear-filled eyes scanned the horizon, hoping for the distant glimmer of headlights returning to rescue him. But the only light he saw was from the cold, indifferent stars twinkling above. Exhaustion tugged at him, but fear kept him wide awake. Every rustle of grass or whisper of the wind sent shivers through his small body, his mind conjuring monsters lurking in the shadows. Then, a sound pierced the night, a distant howl. Emilio froze, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. Another howl followed, then another, until the eerie chorus enveloped him. He strained his eyes into the darkness and spotted shapes moving in the distance. Silvery forms glided through the field like ghostly apparitions, drawing closer with every second. It was a pack of wolves. Panic gripped Emilio. He wanted to run, to scream, but his body betrayed him, leaving him paralyzed with fear. The wolves crept closer, their gleaming eyes watching him. Soon, they formed a circle around the trembling child. Emilio squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the worst. But instead of an attack, he felt something soft brush against his cheek. Slowly, he opened his eyes and found himself face to face with a gray-furred she-wolf. Her golden eyes held a peculiar mix of curiosity and understanding. To Emilio's surprise, her gaze didn't frighten him, it comforted him. Tentatively, Emilio extended a shaky hand and touched the wolf's fur. The animal didn't flinch, allowing the boy's touch. The other wolves approached cautiously, sniffing him as if to understand this fragile, crying creature. Emilio realized they meant no harm. The gray she-wolf lay down beside him, offering her warm body as a shield against the night's cold. The other wolves formed a protective circle around him. For the first time since his parents abandoned him, Emilio felt safe. Curled up next to the wolf, exhaustion finally overtook him. Emilio's eyes fluttered closed, and he sank into a deep sleep, cradled by the rhythmic breathing of the wolves and the steady heartbeat of the gray she-wolf. As he slept, the pack stood guard, vigilant against the night's dangers. In the most unexpected way, Emilio had found a family in the solitude of the countryside. When the first rays of sunlight pierced through the clouds, Emilio stirred. For a moment, he was disoriented, unsure of where he was. But then the memories of the night hit him, cold and sharp. His parents had abandoned him. Sitting up slowly, he rubbed his swollen eyes. Then, he noticed he was not alone. Around him, the wolf pack rested peacefully. The gray she-wolf, still by his side, raised her head as Emilio moved, her golden eyes meeting his with a calm reassurance. "Hello," Emilio whispered, reaching out a trembling hand. The she-wolf leaned closer, her snout brushing his fingers, allowing him to pet her. "Thank you for taking care of me," he said softly. As the other wolves began to wake, Emilio watched them in awe, no longer afraid. In their movements and the way they surrounded him, he sensed an understanding, an acknowledgement of his pain and loneliness. Against all odds, in a single night, Emilio had found something extraordinary: kindness, protection, and a bond that transcended the barriers of language and species. In the heart of the wilderness, he was no longer alone. The grey wolf stood up, stretched, and then looked back at Emilio before beginning to walk slowly. She stopped after a few steps, glancing back to see if the boy was following her. Emilio understood the silent message and rose to his feet, still clutching his teddy bear tightly. "Do you want me to go with you?" he asked softly. The wolf, of course, couldn't answer, but her steady gaze was all the reassurance Emilio needed. The pack began to move, the grey wolf leading the way. Emilio trailed behind them, leaving the open field and heading toward the forest that loomed in the distance. Every few steps, Emilio glanced back, still holding on to the faint hope of seeing his parents' car coming to take him home. But all he saw was the empty, dusty road stretching into the horizon. As they walked, the weight of his situation pressed down on him. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, thirst parched his throat, and his tattered, dirty clothes did little to protect him from the cold morning air. Yet, something about the wolf's presence, especially the calm authority of the grey wolf, gave him the strength to keep moving forward. When they reached the forest's edge, the pack stopped. The trees towered before them, their branches interwoven to create a dark canopy that barely let sunlight filter through. Emilio hesitated. The forest seemed dark, vast, and menacing. Sensing his fear, the grey wolf approached him and gently nudged him with her snout, urging him forward. Emilio looked into her golden eyes and felt a strange, unshakable trust. "It's okay," he whispered to himself. "Let's go." He stepped into the forest, following the wolves as they navigated the underbrush with ease. Emilio stumbled now and then, his small legs struggling to keep up. The ground was covered in dry leaves that crunched underfoot, and the air smelled of damp earth and pine. Despite the challenge, he pressed on, determined to stay close to his protectors. After what felt like hours to Emilio's tired legs, they arrived at a clearing. In its center stood a large rock, and at its base was a hidden cave, concealed by thick vegetation. The pack moved purposefully toward the cave, and Emilio followed cautiously. The cave's interior surprised him. Its floor was carpeted with dry leaves and soft moss, creating a natural, cozy bed. The grey wolf settled into a corner and made a soft, inviting sound, beckoning Emilio closer. Exhausted from the walk and overwhelmed by everything that had happened, Emilio curled up next to her. The warmth of her fur was comforting, and he relaxed for the first time in what felt like forever. The other wolves arranged themselves around the cave, some standing guard at the entrance, others resting inside. Emilio felt safe, safer than he had in a long time. As he lay with his head resting on the grey wolf's side, thoughts of his parents flooded his mind. Why had they abandoned him? Would they come back for him? Silent tears streamed down his cheeks. Sensing his sadness, the grey wolf drew closer and gently licked his face, as if wiping away his tears. Emilio hugged her tightly, burying his face in her soft fur. "I'll call you Shadow," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Because you're with me in the darkness." Shadow let out a soft, approving growl, and Emilio smiled faintly. Surrounded by the rhythmic breathing of the wolves and Shadow's protective warmth, he drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. While Emilio slept, life in the forest carried on. Birds sang in the trees, small animals scurried through the underbrush, and the wind whispered through the leaves. Inside the cave, however, Emilio was oblivious to it all, cocooned in the safety of his new and unconventional family. The sun's slow journey across the sky marked the passing hours. The wolves took turns leaving the cave to hunt, always ensuring some remained to watch over the sleeping boy. Shadow never left his side, her vigilant eyes watching over him with an almost maternal affection. When Emilio finally woke, the sun was dipping low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Disoriented for a moment, he rubbed his eyes before the memories of the previous night came rushing back. His stomach growled loudly, reminding him he hadn't eaten in over a day. Hearing the sound, Shadow stood and left the cave, returning minutes later with a mouthful of berries. She dropped them at Emilio's feet, her golden eyes watching him. Emilio hesitated at first, unsure about the strange offering, but hunger won out. He ate slowly, savoring the burst of sweetness on his tongue. It wasn't much, but it eased the sharp ache in his stomach. "Thank you, Shadow," he said, reaching out to stroke her head. As he ate, the weight of his reality settled in. He no longer had a home. No parents to care for him. But he had Shadow and the pack. He had this cave and the forest. A part of him still clung to the hope that his parents might return, that this was all some terrible mistake. Yet, another part of him, a part that grew stronger with every passing moment, began to accept his new life. "I guess we're a family now," he said softly, looking at Shadow. "You, me, and the pack." Shadow moved closer, resting her head on his lap. Emilio smiled, a warmth spreading through his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. Outside, the sun sank below the horizon, giving way to another night in the forest. But this time, Emilio wasn't afraid. He knew he wasn't alone. As stars began to dot the night sky, Emilio snuggled against Shadow, surrounded by the pack. For the first time since his parents had left him, he felt at home. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Little by little, Emilio adapted to his new life in the forest with his wolf family. Each day in the forest brought new challenges, but it also revealed new discoveries and lessons. Emilio learned to move through the dense foliage with the agility of a wolf, attuning himself to the forest's myriad sounds and scents. His once soft, delicate feet became tough with calluses, allowing him to run barefoot across the forest floor without pain. His pale skin grew sun-kissed, darkened by the sunlight that filtered through the leafy canopy. Shadow became both Emilio's guardian and teacher, showing him how to find edible berries, drink safely from crystal-clear streams, and hide when danger approached. The other wolves contributed to his education as well. From them, Emilio learned to move silently, to listen for the faintest rustle of leaves, and to communicate without words. Over time, Emilio developed his own unique way of communicating with the pack. It was a silent language, a blend of gestures, sounds, and looks. He could express hunger, fear, curiosity, or joy with a simple movement, and the wolves would respond in kind. This unspoken bond deepened as Emilio adapted to his new life. His connection with Shadow grew stronger, the grey wolf taking on a maternal role, always attentive to his needs and comforting him when memories of his abandonment surfaced. One morning, while exploring a new part of the forest, Emilio and Shadow stumbled upon a bubbling stream. Thirsty from their trek, Emilio knelt to drink. As he leaned over the water, his reflection caught his eye for the first time in months. His hair, once neatly trimmed and combed, now hung in wild, tangled strands past his shoulders. Dirt streaked his face, marking the passage of time in the wilderness. Yet his eyes shone with a strength and determination he had never seen before. "I've changed, Shadow," he murmured, touching the surface of the water, his reflection rippling beneath his fingers. Shadow approached and licked his cheek gently, as if reassuring him that the changes were not bad. With each passing day, Emilio felt more a part of the pack. He participated in hunts, though his role was mostly that of an observer. He understood the wolves' howls, recognizing when they signaled danger, called for the pack, or simply sang to the moon. Still, there were moments when Emilio yearned for the comforts of his past life, a warm bed, hot meals, or his mother's soothing voice singing him to sleep. On those nights, he clung tightly to his teddy bear, the last remnant of his old world, and let silent tears fall. Shadow always seemed to sense his sorrow, curling up beside him and offering her quiet presence as solace. Little by little, Emilio learned to carry his pain without letting it consume him. He began to accept his reality, all while keeping the memory of his past alive. One night, as the pack rested in the cave, Emilio dreamed vividly. In his dream, his parents didn't abandon him. Instead, they brought him to the forest, introducing him to Shadow and the pack. In this dream world, his two lives merged in perfect harmony. When he woke, tears glistened in his eyes, but for the first time, they were not born of sadness, they were tears of acceptance and understanding. Looking at Shadow, who slept peacefully beside him, Emilio whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for being my family." As the months passed, Emilio grew more in tune with the forest. He could predict weather changes by observing animal behavior and the subtle shifts in plants. His senses sharpened, his body became stronger, and he could climb trees or run long distances with ease. But most importantly, he no longer felt alone. The pack was his family. The forest was his home. However, fate had other plans. Emilio's life in the forest was about to change in ways he could never have anticipated. One dawn, as the sky blushed with hues of pink and orange, Emilio and Shadow ventured out for their usual morning exploration. The crisp forest air filled their lungs as they moved in companionable silence, enjoying the peace of the new day. Suddenly, a strange noise broke the tranquility. It was a sound Emilio hadn't heard in months, the voice of another human. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Shadow, sensing his tension, stood alert, her ears pricked and body poised to react. Cautiously, Emilio crept toward the sound, crouching behind a bush for cover. Peering through the leaves, he saw a middle-aged man kneeling beside a fallen tree, examining the ground. It was the first time in months Emilio had seen another person. A whirlwind of emotions surged within him: fear, curiosity, longing. A part of him yearned to run to the man, to speak, to feel a connection to his own kind. But another part urged him to retreat, to flee to the safety of the cave and his pack. While Emilio grappled with these conflicting desires, the man looked up. Their eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. The man blinked, his expression shifting from confusion to astonishment. There, before him, stood a disheveled boy with tangled hair, dirt-streaked skin, and tattered clothes, accompanied by a grey wolf. "Hello," the man called softly, his voice gentle, as if afraid of startling Emilio. "Are you okay, little one?" Emilio didn't answer. It had been so long since he last spoke to another human that words seemed stuck in his throat. Sensing his hesitation, Shadow stepped in front of him protectively, growling softly at the stranger. The man, undeterred by the wolf's presence, introduced himself as Juan Mendoza. He remained calm, moving slowly and deliberately as he reached into his backpack and pulled out a package of cookies. "You must be hungry," Juan said with a kind smile, holding out the cookies. "I won't hurt you, I promise." The sweet aroma triggered a flood of memories for Emilio: family dinners, the warmth of a home, a life that felt so distant now. Almost without thinking, he stepped forward, away from Shadow's protective stance. The she-wolf watched him with concern but didn't intervene, as if sensing this encounter was important for Emilio. With trembling hands, Emilio took a cookie and bit into it. The sugary taste exploded on his tongue, unlocking a torrent of emotions and memories. Tears rolled down his dirt-streaked cheeks. Moved by the sight, Juan approached slowly. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Why are you alone out here in the forest?" Emilio tried to respond, but only a hoarse sound escaped his throat. He had spent so long communicating with Shadow and the pack that human words felt foreign. Finally, in a voice rough from disuse, he managed to croak, "My name is Emilio." Juan nodded encouragingly, his gentle demeanor urging the boy to continue. Bit by bit, between tears and halting words, Emilio told his story. He spoke of abandonment, of how Shadow and her pack had saved him and taught him to survive in the wild. Shadow stayed close, alert but not aggressive, as Juan listened intently. The man's expression was a mix of wonder and compassion. When Emilio finished, Juan said, "What you've been through is incredible. But you can't keep living like this. You need a home, food, clothing, a proper roof over your head." Emilio glanced at Shadow, then back at Juan. "But this is my family now," he said, stroking the wolf's fur. "I can't leave them." Juan paused, thoughtful. Then, with an understanding smile, he offered a compromise. "What if you come with me to my farm? It's close to the forest. You'll have a warm bed and regular meals, but you can still visit your pack whenever you want." Emilio hesitated. The offer was tempting, but the thought of leaving the forest, of being apart from Shadow and the pack, filled him with dread. "Think about it," Juan said gently. "You don't have to decide now. I'll come back tomorrow at dawn. If you choose to come with me, I'll be waiting here." With those words, Juan left, leaving Emilio alone with a life-altering decision. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emilio sat by Shadow, searching the wolf's golden eyes for guidance. "What should I do, Shadow?" he whispered, hugging her tightly. Night enveloped the forest in a heavy silence. In their cave, Emilio lay awake, his thoughts tangled. Shadow stayed close, her presence a silent reassurance. He replayed his conversation with Juan over and over. The idea of returning to civilization stirred conflicting emotions. He longed for the comforts of a home, soft beds, warm meals, and the company of people. Yet, the forest had become his sanctuary, and the pack was his family. The thought of leaving them felt like tearing away a piece of his soul. "Shadow," he murmured into the darkness, stroking the wolf's fur. "What should I do?" Shadow couldn't answer in words, but her steady gaze conveyed understanding. As the hours passed, Emilio reflected on his life in the forest, the pack's unwavering loyalty, the skills they taught him, the sense of belonging they gave. But he also remembered his life before: laughter, human warmth, the comfort of being cared for. When dawn's first light pierced the forest canopy, Emilio had made his decision. Rising from his spot, he stretched his stiff limbs and looked at Shadow. "Let's go," he said softly. "We have to meet Juan." Shadow stood immediately, ready to follow. Together, they left the cave, the pack watching silently as if understanding the significance of this moment. The journey to the clearing was filled with nervous energy. Emilio's heart pounded. Was he making the right choice? What would his life be like now? When they reached the clearing, Juan was there, sitting on a fallen log. He rose as he saw Emilio approach, a warm smile spreading across his face. "You came," Juan said, then noticed the wolf at Emilio's side. "And you brought your friend." Taking a deep breath, Emilio spoke. "I've decided to go with you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But there's one condition." Juan's expression turned curious. "What's that?" "Shadow comes with me," Emilio said firmly, resting a hand on the wolf's back. "And I must be able to visit the pack. They're my family. I can't abandon them." Juan looked at Emilio for a moment, then nodded with a kind smile. "Deal." Emilio felt a wave of relief and a spark of hope. He had taken the first step toward bridging the two worlds he loved. Juan seemed surprised for a moment, but his expression quickly softened. "I understand," he said. "It won't be easy, but we'll make it work. My farm is on the edge of the forest, so you'll be able to visit your pack. As for Shadow, well, we'll figure out how to help her adjust to farm life." Relief washed over Emilio like a warm tide. He glanced at Shadow, who met his gaze with those wise, golden eyes full of understanding. "Thank you," Emilio whispered, his voice trembling as tears welled in his eyes. Juan approached slowly, resting a reassuring hand on Emilio's shoulder. "Let's go home, boy," he said gently. And so, Emilio began his journey back to civilization. Shadow walked faithfully at his side while Juan led the way toward a new life. As they left the heart of the forest behind, Emilio heard the distant howls of the pack. The sound was bittersweet, a farewell and a promise all at once. The road to Juan's farm was long, and every step brought new experiences for Emilio. The unfamiliar sights, sounds, and smells awakened memories of the world he had left behind. Shadow, ever watchful, observed everything with cautious curiosity but without aggression. When they finally arrived, Emilio gasped. The farm was simple but cozy, a modest house surrounded by lush green fields with the forest visible in the distance. "Welcome to your new home, Emilio," Juan said with a warm smile. Emilio hesitated for a moment before stepping forward, Shadow faithfully by his side. He knew the challenges ahead would be different from those in the forest, but he felt ready to face them. With Shadow beside him and the promise of staying connected to the pack, he believed he could adapt to this new world without losing the bond he cherished with the wild. The first days on Juan's farm were a whirlwind of discovery. After months in the forest, the comforts of modern life felt both strange and fascinating. That first night, Juan showed Emilio his room, a small but inviting space with a soft bed, a closet, and a window that looked out onto the forest. Emilio stared at the bed in amazement, as if he had forgotten what it was like to sleep on one. "Can I?" he asked timidly, pointing to the bed. "Of course, Emilio," Juan said with a knowing smile. Carefully, as if afraid the bed might vanish, Emilio sat down. The mattress's softness surprised him, so unlike the hard floor of the cave. Shadow, who had not left his side, sniffed at the bed curiously. "Can Shadow sleep here too?" Emilio asked, looking up at Juan with pleading eyes. Juan hesitated, but the bond between the boy and the wolf was undeniable. "Okay," he said at last, But we'll have to teach her some house rules. That night, Emilio experienced the strange comfort of sleeping in a bed again, with Shadow curled up at his feet. Despite the coziness, the ticking of a clock and the hum of the refrigerator felt foreign compared to the familiar sounds of the forest. The following days were a time of rediscovery. Juan patiently taught Emilio how to use the bathroom, shower with hot water, and brush his teeth. Everyday tasks became new adventures. Food posed another challenge. After months of eating mainly small game, Emilio's stomach had to adjust to a more varied diet. Juan prepared simple, nutritious meals, slowly introducing him to new flavors. Shadow, too, was adapting. With infinite patience, Juan taught the wolf basic commands and set boundaries for where she could and couldn't go. To their surprise, Shadow proved remarkably intelligent and willing to learn. One morning at breakfast, Juan brought up a topic he had been avoiding. "Emilio," he began gently, "I think it's time we talk about school." Emilio froze, the spoon slipping from his hand. Fear flashed in his eyes at the thought of being around other children and sitting in a classroom after so much time away from civilization. "I'm not ready," he whispered, looking down. Juan moved closer, resting a comforting hand on the boy's shoulder. "I know it's scary," he said softly. "But it's important for your future. We don't have to rush, we can start with lessons at home, step by step." Relieved by Juan's understanding, Emilio nodded slowly. As the weeks passed, he gradually regained the skills he had lost. Juan taught him to read and write again, and Emilio's quick learning amazed them both. Not everything was easy, though. Some nights, Emilio woke up screaming, haunted by nightmares of his abandonment. In those moments, Shadow was always there, her silent presence a source of comfort. One afternoon, while Juan worked in the fields, Emilio sat on the porch with Shadow by his side, staring at the forest in the distance. Nostalgia tugged at his heart. "Do you think they miss us?" he asked softly, looking down at Shadow. In response, Shadow stood and began walking toward the trees, pausing to glance back at him as if inviting him to follow. Emilio's heart leapt with excitement, and he hurried after her. They didn't have to go far. In a nearby clearing, the pack was waiting. The wolves greeted them with joy, circling Emilio and sniffing him as if to make sure he was unharmed. Emilio sat on the ground, laughing softly as he stroked their fur. In that moment, he realized he didn't have to choose between the two worlds. Juan's farm offered security and opportunities, while the pack gave him a connection to the wild he couldn't bear to lose. When they returned to the farm, Juan was waiting on the porch, worry etched on his face. But when he saw Emilio's peaceful expression, he smiled knowingly. "A good visit?" Emilio nodded, his heart full of contentment. Emilio nodded, feeling more complete than he had in a long time. "Thank you," he said suddenly, throwing his arms around Juan in an impulsive hug. "Thank you for understanding." Juan returned the embrace, his voice thick with emotion. "Always, Emilio. Always." That night, as Emilio lay in bed with Shadow curled at his feet, he realized he was finally starting to feel at home. He had Juan, he had Shadow, and he had the pack. His life was a bridge between two worlds. Though the path ahead wouldn't always be easy, he was ready to walk it. With the distant howling of the wolves drifting through the open window, Emilio fell asleep dreaming of the adventures yet to come. The months passed, and Emilio slowly gained confidence in his new life. True to his promise, Juan eased him into society with lessons at home and occasional trips to the nearby town. One morning, over breakfast, Juan decided it was time to take the next step. "Emilio," Juan began gently, "I think you're ready to go to school." Emilio froze, his fork hovering mid-air. Despite months of preparation, the idea of stepping into a classroom filled with children still filled him with dread. Can I bring Shadow?" he asked, seeking comfort in his loyal companion. Juan chuckled softly. "I'm afraid not, Emilio. But I promise, she'll be waiting for you when you get home." The first day of school came too quickly. Emilio woke up at dawn, his stomach twisting with nerves. Shadow seemed to sense his anxiety, staying close as he got ready. Juan drove him to school in his old truck, Shadow riding in the back. Emilio sat silently, his mind swirling with worries. What if the other kids laughed at him? What if he didn't remember how to behave in a classroom? When they arrived, Juan parked and turned to him. "Remember," he said softly, "you're brave and strong. You've survived the forest and made friends with wolves. You can do this." Emilio nodded, summoning all the courage he could. Before stepping out of the truck, he reached back to stroke Shadow's fur. "I'll be back soon," he whispered. The morning passed in a blur. His teacher, Mrs. Martinez, was kind and patient, but every new experience was overwhelming. The other children whispered about him, their curious eyes darting his way. During recess, Emilio sat alone in the corner of the playground, watching the other kids play. He felt like an outsider, a stranger in a world he had once known. Then, a little girl with dark braided hair and a friendly smile approached him. "Hi, I'm Lucia," she said brightly. "Do you want to play?" Emilio blinked, startled. "Me? I don't know how," he admitted quietly. Lucia sat beside him. "That's okay," she said with a grin. "I'll teach you." With her help, Emilio began to remember what it was like to play. By the time the bell rang, he had even laughed a few times. The rest of the day went by faster than he expected. When the final bell rang, Emilio realized with surprise that a small part of him didn't want to leave. Juan was waiting outside with Shadow, who barked joyfully at the sight of him. "How was it?" Juan asked as they drove back to the farm. Emilio thought for a moment. "Different," he said finally. "But not as bad as I thought it would be." Juan smiled, pride shining in his eyes. That night, as Emilio prepared for bed, he reflected on his day. It had been hard, but also exciting. For the first time in a long time, he felt like a regular kid. Shadow curled up at his feet, and Emilio whispered, "I think I'm going to be okay." Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Emilio gradually adjusted to his routine. He attended school in the mornings, where Lucia and the other children became his friends. In the afternoons, he helped Juan on the farm and spent time with Shadow. On weekends, they visited the forest to see the pack. One day, as they walked through the woods, Juan broke the silence with a surprising question. "Emilio," he said, "I've been thinking, would you like me to officially adopt you?" Emilio froze, staring at Juan with wide eyes. "You mean, you'd be my dad?" Juan nodded, his voice steady. "Only if you want. But I want you to know you'll always have a home with me, no matter what." Tears welled in Emilio's eyes as he flung his arms around Juan without a word. Shadow, sensing the moment's significance, pressed her head against Emilio's leg. In that moment, surrounded by the forest, with Shadow at his side and Juan's arms around him, Emilio knew he had finally found his place in the world. But fate had more in store for their story. One afternoon, as Emilio helped Juan repair a fence, a police car rumbled down the dirt road. Juan's brow furrowed with concern. "Stay here with Shadow," he instructed before heading to meet the officers. Emilio watched nervously as the conversation unfolded. Though he couldn't hear the words, he saw the worry deepen on Juan's face. Finally, Juan turned and motioned for him to come closer. "Emilio," he said gently, placing a protective hand on his shoulder. "The officers have news about your biological parents." The world seemed to stop. Emilio's parents, the ones who had abandoned him, wanted to see him. The younger officer crouched to meet Emilio's gaze. "Your parents have been looking for you," he said kindly. "They want to meet you." "No," Emilio whispered, stepping closer to Juan and Shadow. "I don't want to see them." The older officer spoke softly. "We understand, but legally, they have rights. They want a chance to explain themselves." Juan's grip on Emilio's shoulder tightened. "He doesn't have to decide now," he said firmly. "He needs time." The officers nodded, leaving their contact information before driving away. That night, Emilio lay awake, staring out the window at the forest. His mind swirled with fear, anger, and confusion. Shadow's steady presence by his side was his only comfort. The next morning, Juan made a decision. "Let's visit the pack," he said, knowing the forest would help Emilio find clarity. As they walked, Juan spoke sincerely to Emilio. "I know this is hard," he said gently, "but I want you to remember you'll always have a home here with me and with Shadow." Emilio nodded, grateful for Juan's unwavering support. When they reached the clearing where the pack usually gathered, the wolves greeted them warmly, their trust in Emilio evident. Sitting on the forest floor, surrounded by the animals that had saved him, Emilio absent-mindedly stroked the fur of one of the wolves. Deep in thought, he finally made a decision. "I want to see them," he said quietly. "I want to know why they did it." Juan's face showed a mix of pride and concern. "I'm proud of you, Emilio," he said. "And I'll be with you every step of the way." The following days were a swirl of anticipation and nervousness. When the day of the meeting arrived, Juan ensured it took place in neutral territory, the office of a social worker in town. As they entered, Emilio's heart pounded. Shadow had to wait in the car, but her presence outside brought him comfort. Then, after all this time, Emilio found himself face to face with his biological parents. The room was eerily quiet as Emilio studied them. They looked thinner, older, with worry etched into their faces. His mother was the first to speak, her voice trembling. "Emilio, my son." "Why?" Emilio interrupted, his voice steadier than he expected. "Why did you abandon me?" His parents exchanged a painful look. His father spoke first. "We were desperate, Emilio. We had lost everything, our home, our jobs. We thought you would be better off without us. It was the worst mistake of our lives," his mother added, her eyes brimming with tears. "Not a day has passed that we haven't regretted it." Emilio listened in silence, torn between anger, sorrow, and a small flicker of understanding. Finally, he spoke. "I understand you were desperate," he said slowly, "but you left me. Alone. You abandoned me." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I've found a new family now. Juan has taken care of me. He's given me a home. I have Shadow. I have the pack." "The pack?" his father asked, puzzled. Emilio then shared his story, the wolves that saved him, Shadow's loyalty, and how he survived in the forest. He spoke about Juan's kindness and how he'd found a place to belong. With every word, Emilio felt stronger, more certain of who he was. When he finished, silence filled the room. His parents looked at him with a mix of awe and regret. "I'm so sorry, Emilio," his mother whispered. "We can never undo what we did. But if you'll give us the chance, we'd like to be part of your life again." Emilio glanced at Juan, who gave him a reassuring nod. Then, turning back to his parents, he said, "I need time. I can't forgive you right now. But maybe we can start over." Slowly. Tears welled in their eyes, but there was a spark of hope. As they left the office, Emilio felt drained but at peace. Juan pulled him into a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you," he said. Shadow was waiting in the car, her tail wagging furiously. Emilio buried his face in her fur, finding comfort in her steady presence. "Let's go home," Juan said with a smile. As they drove back to the farm, Emilio gazed out at the woods. His life had taken yet another unexpected turn, but he felt ready to face it. With Juan, Shadow, the pack, and now the possibility of reconnecting with his past, Emilio knew he wouldn't be alone. The months that followed were a time of adjustment. Emilio cautiously began rebuilding a relationship with his parents. At first, their meetings were brief and tense, held in neutral places like the park or a local cafe. Emilio remained guarded, unsure of how much to let them in. But slowly, walls began to come down. One afternoon, during a meeting in the park, his mother, Elena, noticed the bond between Emilio and Shadow. "It's incredible how she listens to you," Elena remarked, watching as Shadow followed Emilio's every gesture. Emilio smiled, stroking Shadow's fur. "It's not about obedience," he explained. "It's about trust. We understand each other." The moment gave Emilio an idea. Glancing at Juan for reassurance, he turned to his parents. "Would you like to meet the pack?" Elena and Ricardo exchanged nervous looks. "Are you sure it's safe?" Ricardo asked cautiously. Emilio nodded confidently. "If they're with me, yes. The wolves trust me." On a crisp Saturday morning, Emilio led his biological parents into the forest. Juan accompanied them, his presence reassuring to everyone. Emilio felt a mix of excitement and nervousness as they approached the clearing. When the pack appeared, His parents froze, awestruck by the majestic creatures surrounding them. The wolves greeted Emilio warmly, their trust evident. Shadow stayed close by his side, her eyes watchful. "This is my family," Emilio said simply, looking at both his parents and the wolves. In that moment, Emilio realized something important. His life was no longer divided between the wild and the human world, it was a perfect blend of both. With every step he took toward the future, Emilio grew stronger, knowing he had the love of two families, the loyalty of Shadow, and the unbreakable bond of the pack. Together, they faced the next chapter of his extraordinary journey. Shadow led the way, his tail wagging enthusiastically as they entered the forest. Emilio noticed his parents glancing around with a mix of awe and apprehension. For them, the forest was an unknown, potentially dangerous place. For Emilio, it was home. "This is where the pack found me," Emilio explained as they reached the clearing. "I was alone and scared, but they protected me." As if summoned by his words, the wolves began to emerge from the trees, their forms graceful and imposing. Elena stifled a gasp, and Ricardo instinctively stepped back, but Emilio remained calm, Shadow steady at his side. The wolves approached cautiously, sniffing the air. Emilio spoke to them softly, using a combination of words and sounds he had developed during his time with them. Slowly, the wolves relaxed, some coming close enough for Emilio to pet. "It's incredible," Elena whispered, tears in her eyes. "Our son, the wolf boy." Emilio glanced at her, startled by the pride in her voice. For the first time, he saw more than guilt and regret in her expression, he saw admiration. Ricardo crouched beside Emilio, keeping a respectful distance from the wolves. "Son," he said, his voice trembling, "what you've built here, it's extraordinary. We were so wrong to think you'd be better off without us. You're stronger and braver than we ever imagined." Something deep within Emilio stirred at his father's words. Without hesitation, he reached out and took Ricardo's hand. Ricardo, in turn, clasped Elena's hand, and there, surrounded by the wolf pack, with Juan and Shadow as silent witnesses, the fractured family took their first real step toward healing. That evening, back at the farm, Emilio sat on the porch, gazing at the forest. Shadow rested at his feet, and Juan joined him, offering a steaming cup of hot chocolate. "How do you feel?" Juan asked gently. Emilio considered for a moment. "Like something broken inside me is starting to heal," he said finally. Juan nodded. "Healing takes time, Emilio. And it's okay to still feel angry or hurt sometimes. The important thing is that you're moving forward." "Thank you," Emilio said, leaning against Juan. "For everything." Juan wrapped an arm around him, his pride evident. In the following days, Emilio faced new challenges and opportunities. At school, he began opening up about his time in the forest. His classmates, who had once seen him as a curiosity, now listened to him with awe and respect. Lucia, his first and closest friend, became his confidant. One day during recess, she said, "It's like you're a bridge between two worlds, the human world and the wild." Her words resonated deeply with Emilio. Yes, he thought, he was a bridge. Perhaps that was his purpose, to share the lessons he had learned from the wolves and reveal the beauty and wisdom of the natural world. Inspired by this new perspective, Emilio began working on a school project about forest conservation and the protection of wolves. Drawing on his personal experiences, he educated his peers and teachers about the importance of preserving nature. His parents, Elena and Ricardo, moved by Emilio's passion, became active in local conservation organizations. Juan, ever supportive, offered his farm as a venue for wildlife workshops. Shadow, of course, became the star of these events, demonstrating the intelligence and loyalty of wolves. As Emilio grew older, his story spread beyond the town. Journalists and researchers became interested in the boy raised by wolves. While Emilio remained cautious about sharing his life, he saw the value in using his voice for a greater cause. "I'm not a show," he told Juan after declining a national television appearance. "I want to help, not entertain." Juan smiled, his pride evident. "You're making the right choices, Emilio. Your voice can make a real difference." At 16, Emilio was not just a bridge between two worlds but a force for change. One day, while walking in the forest, he noticed something troubling: deep tracks from heavy machinery and trees marked for logging. Heart racing, he ran back to the farm. "They're planning to cut down part of the forest," he told Juan, breathless. "The pack's home is in danger." Juan frowned, worry etched into his face. "We must do something," he said firmly. "But we'll need help." Emilio nodded, determination blazing in his eyes. "I know exactly who to call." In the days that followed, Emilio mobilized his community. His parents, now seasoned conservationists, joined the fight. His classmates, led by Lucia, became his strongest allies. Journalists who had once sought his story now became his platform. Together, they organized peaceful protests, online petitions, and awareness campaigns. Emilio became the face of the cause, his unique story captivating the nation. "This forest isn't just trees and animals," Emilio said during a television interview. "It's a home, an ecosystem, a vital part of our community. And for me, it's the reason I'm alive today." The battle wasn't easy. The logging company had resources and political connections, but Emilio and his allies had something more powerful: a deep connection to the land and a united community. The turning point came when Emilio invited government officials and logging executives on a guided walk through the forest. With Shadow by his side, Emilio showed them the trails, the wildlife, and the interconnected beauty of the ecosystem. At a key moment, as if orchestrated by nature itself, the wolf pack appeared in a nearby clearing. The officials and executives watched in awe as Emilio approached the wolves, who welcomed him as one of their own. "These wolves saved my life," Emilio said, his voice steady with emotion. "When I was lost and scared, they taught me about survival, loyalty, and the importance of community. And now, we're about to destroy their home, the home they shared with me." The impact was immediate and profound. The logging company announced it would withdraw its plans, and government officials pledged to designate the area as a protected nature reserve. Years later, Emilio's story continued to inspire. The forest remained a sanctuary, the wolves thrived, and Emilio, a bridge between worlds, used his voice to protect the natural world and teach others its value. His extraordinary journey had become a legacy, one rooted in courage, love, and the unbreakable bond between humanity and nature. The news of the forest's protection was met with jubilation across the town. That night, Juan's farm became the heart of a celebration. Friends, family, and neighbors gathered under a canopy of stars, their laughter and cheers echoing into the forest. Emilio, surrounded by Juan, his biological parents, Lucia, and of course, Shadow, felt a surge of gratitude and pride. "You did it, Emilio," Juan said, pulling him into a warm embrace. "You saved the forest." Emilio shook his head, smiling. "No, it wasn't just me. We did it together." As the party wound down and the house grew quiet, Emilio stepped out onto the porch. Shadow joined him, her sleek silhouette framed by the moonlight. Together, they gazed into the forest, their sanctuary. "We did it, girl," Emilio whispered, stroking Shadow's fur. "We protected our home." The forest stood before him, a living testament to their efforts. As he sat in the stillness, Emilio reflected on his journey. Once an abandoned child, lost and frightened, he had grown into a protector and advocate. This victory wasn't the end, it was the beginning of a new chapter. "We've got a lot of work ahead of us, Shadow," he said. The old wolf responded with a soft howl, as if she understood. Under the starry sky, Emilio made a silent vow. He would dedicate his life to protecting the forest and educating others about the importance of living in harmony with nature. The boy saved by wolves would become a guardian, a bridge between two worlds. The following years saw Emilio thrive. After graduating high school with honors, he pursued a degree in biology and environmental conservation at a nearby university, allowing him to stay on the farm with Juan and Shadow. During his studies, Emilio became a standout student, blending academic knowledge with his unparalleled experiences in the wild. His professors often invited him to speak about his life, and he quickly gained recognition as a compelling advocate for conservation. Meanwhile, Juan's farm evolved into an environmental education center. With Emilio's help, Juan built facilities to welcome school groups and tourists eager to learn about wildlife. Shadow, though now an old wolf, remained the star attraction, showcasing the intelligence and bonds that could exist between humans and wild animals. Elena and Ricardo, Emilio's biological parents, became frequent collaborators at the center. They found redemption in their work, strengthening their relationship with Emilio as they contributed to programs benefiting the community and the ecosystem. One day, while Emilio was working on his thesis on wolf behavior, he received a call that would change his life. "Mr. Mendoza," a voice said on the line, "we've been following your work and your story with great interest. We'd like to offer you a position as an ambassador for our global campaign to protect wolf habitats." Stunned, Emilio listened as the prestigious organization outlined the opportunity. It was a chance to take his message to a global audience, but it would mean leaving the forest. That evening, Emilio sat on the porch with Juan and Shadow. As the moonlight bathed them, he shared his dilemma. Juan smiled warmly. "Emilio, you're not the scared boy I found in the forest anymore. You're a man, capable of making your own decisions. Whatever you choose, I'll be proud of you." Shadow, sensing the weight of the moment, rested her head on Emilio's lap. Stroking her graying fur, Emilio whispered, "I don't want to leave you." "You won't leave us," Juan assured him. "This will always be your home. But maybe it's time to share your gift with the world." That night, Emilio sought solace in the clearing where the pack had first found him. Under the canopy of stars, he made his decision. He would accept the position, but on his terms. The following months were a whirlwind of activity. Emilio traveled the world, sharing his story and advocating for wolf conservation. His work inspired communities, created wildlife corridors, and changed perceptions of wolves from feared predators to vital ecological beings. But Emilio always returned to the farm. It remained his sanctuary, where Juan, Shadow, and the forest welcomed him home. Together, they transformed the farm into a renowned research and rehabilitation center, a beacon for conservationists worldwide. Time, however, spares no one. One autumn afternoon, Emilio returned from a trip to find Juan waiting on the porch, his expression somber. "It's Shadow," Juan said softly. "She doesn't have much time left." Emilio rushed to the barn where Shadow rested. The old wolf lifted her head weakly, her eyes still bright with love and loyalty. Sitting beside her, Emilio stroked her fur, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you," he whispered. "For saving me. For always being by my side." Shadow gave his hand a gentle lick, her final gesture of love. Surrounded by Emilio and Juan, the wolf who had changed so many lives peacefully closed her eyes for the last time. That night, Emilio carried Shadow's body into the forest. The pack gathered, as if understanding the significance of the moment. Together, wolves and humans howled at the moon, bidding farewell to their friend and protector. As the howls faded into the night, Emilio felt Shadow's spirit in the rustling leaves, the whispering wind, and the enduring strength of the forest. Her legacy, and his, would live on. 20 years later, Emilio stood as a globally respected conservationist. Under his leadership, Juan's farm had become an internationally recognized research and rehabilitation center. His efforts had led to the establishment of nature reserves and laws protecting wolves worldwide. Though time had aged him, Emilio's passion burned as brightly as ever. The boy saved by wolves had fulfilled his promise to protect, to educate, and to inspire. Shadow's memory remained alive in every howl, every tree, and every life touched by their extraordinary story. The legacy of Emilio and Shadow would continue, reminding future generations of the delicate balance between the human world and the wild and the bridges we must build to protect it. Scientists and conservationists from around the world visited Juan's farm, drawn by the opportunity to study wolves and learn about the harmonious coexistence between humans and wildlife. Emilio's story and the sanctuary became a beacon of hope, fostering understanding between two worlds. One spring morning, while Emilio was walking through the forest on his daily observation routine, a sound stopped him in his tracks, the unmistakable cry of a child. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward the source, his heart pounding. In a small clearing, reminiscent of the one where he had been found so many years ago, Emilio saw a boy, no older than 6, curled up against a tree. The child's clothes were torn, his face streaked with dirt, and his sobs were heart-wrenching. Emilio approached cautiously, speaking softly to avoid startling the boy. "Hello," he said gently. "My name is Emilio. Are you lost?" The boy looked up, his eyes filled with fear and confusion. "My parents. I can't find them," he stammered between hiccuping sobs. Emilio's heart ached as memories of his own past flooded back. Kneeling down a respectful distance away, he reassured the boy. "It's okay. I'll help you find them." "What's your name?" "Miguel," the boy whispered. Just then, Emilio noticed movement in the bushes. His body tensed instinctively, ready to protect the child. But what emerged left him breathless, a gray she-wolf with golden eyes, her gaze sharp and intelligent. Behind her, several more wolves appeared, forming a loose circle around the clearing. Miguel clung to Emilio, trembling with fear, but Emilio stayed calm, his eyes fixed on the she-wolf. There was something eerily familiar about her. "Don't be afraid," Emilio whispered to Miguel. "They won't hurt us." The she-wolf stepped forward, her gaze locked on Emilio's. She let out a soft, almost mournful sound, pausing just a few steps away. Emilio extended his hand, allowing her to sniff it. And then, it hit him, a realization like a lightning strike. Tears filled his eyes as he whispered, "You're Sombra's daughter, aren't you?" The wolf responded by gently licking his hand, the same gesture Sombra had used so many times before. Miguel, seeing that the wolves posed no threat, began to relax. "Do you know them?" he asked, his fear giving way to curiosity. Emilio smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. "Oh, Miguel," he said softly, "I have a story to tell you." At that moment, voices echoed through the forest, calling Miguel's name. His parents were searching frantically. Emilio stood, taking Miguel's hand. "Let's get you back to your family," he said, glancing at the she-wolf. "Your parents have a lot to learn about this forest and its guardians." As they walked back, the wolf pack followed at a respectful distance. Emilio felt a profound sense of the circle coming full circle. He, once a lost child saved by wolves, now had the chance to guide another child toward understanding the wild. In the days that followed, Emilio worked closely with Miguel's family, educating them about the forest and the wolves. Miguel, fascinated by Emilio's bond with the wolves, became a frequent visitor to the sanctuary. The gray she-wolf, whom Emilio named Luna in honor of Sombra, often lingered near the center. It was as if she had taken on her mother's role, embodying the unbreakable connection between Emilio and the wolves. One evening, Emilio watched Miguel play with some of the rehabilitated wolves under Luna's watchful eye. Juan joined him on the porch, his voice heavy with emotion. "You know," Juan began, "when I found you in that forest all those years ago, I never imagined we'd be here today. You've changed so many lives, Emilio, not just the wolves, but everyone who's heard your story." Emilio smiled, placing an arm around Juan's shoulders. "And it all started with you, Dad. You gave me a home. You helped me find my way." Together, they watched the sun set over the forest. The haunting melody of a wolf's howl broke the silence, followed by another, and another. Closing his eyes, Emilio let the sound wash over him. In that moment, he felt all the threads of his life weave together, his past as a lost boy, his time with the wolves, the love of his adoptive father, and his mission to inspire others. "The circle is complete," he murmured. But Emilio knew his journey wasn't over. This was the start of a new chapter, one where he would continue to bridge the gap between humans and nature, inspiring others to find harmony in the wild. The story of the wolf boy, born in abandonment and loneliness, had transformed into a tale of hope, conservation, and unbreakable love. Emilio was certain it would inspire future generations to protect the delicate balance between humanity and the natural world for years to come.